Of all the ways I imagined my suburban life descending into madness, a hostile takeover of the water supply wasn't even in the top 10. I'd have bet on a rogue pack of lawn gnomes gaining sentience or perhaps a turf war between rival barbecue dads. But no, my personal apocalypse started, as so many disasters do, with a sputtering faucet and the promise of a decent cup of coffee turning to dust in my mouth. The silence was the first sign something was wrong. Not the usual, peaceful suburban quiet, but a dead, hollow silence where the gentle hum of water in the pipes should have been. I stood at my kitchen sink, the gooseneck faucet looking as betrayed as I felt, my favorite world's okayest graphic designer mug sitting forlornly beneath it. I jiggled the handle. Once. Twice. A sad little cough of air, a single, pathetic drop of water that clung to the aerator like a tear, and then nothing. Okay, I muttered to the empty kitchen. Okay, this is fine. It was not fine. My brain, still clinging to the last dregs of yesterday's caffeine, scrambled for a rational explanation. A pipe burst, maybe. The city doing unannounced maintenance. A localized, house-specific poltergeist with a penchant for petty dehydration. I walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower. Another pneumatic hiss, like the house was sighing its last breath. The toilet tank, when I checked, was an empty ceramic cavern. A gut feeling, the same one that wisely tells me not to engage with Twitter trolls or eat gas station sushi, screamed that this was something more sinister. This had the whiff of organized malevolence. This had the whiff of Brenda. I peered out my kitchen window, across my perfectly acceptable, if slightly rebellious lawn. Next door, my neighbor, Gary, a man whose entire existence seemed to be a state of perpetual, pleasant bewilderment, was staring at his garden hose. He held the nozzle with the grace of a man trying to conduct an orchestra, squeezing the trigger over and over, his expression shifting from confusion to the dawning horror of a man who just realized his prize-winning petunias were facing certain doom. Our eyes met across the low, HOA-approved fence. He gave me a helpless shrug. I gave him one back. It was a silent, desperate communion of the parched. My laptop was already open on the kitchen table, a half-finished logo design for a company called Synergetic Solutions, staring accusingly at me. I ignored it and clicked over to my email. And there it was. An email that had arrived just 20 minutes prior, sitting at the top of my inbox like a digital tombstone. From Harmony Creek Estates, OA Board. HOA, Board at Harmony Creek. Net. Subject: Urgent, community well. Maintenance and water rationing. My blood pressure spiked. I clicked it open, my finger trembling with a mixture of rage and resignation. The email was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive corporate jargon, a word salad clearly concocted by someone who gets a thrill from wielding petty power. Dear residents of Harmony Creek Estates, in our ongoing commitment to community sustainability and resource management, the HOA Board has deemed it necessary to implement a preemptive and essential conservation measure. Effective immediately, the community wells supplying our homes will be temporarily shut off for non-essential periods to ensure the long-term viability of our shared water resources. I read that sentence again. Deemed it necessary. Preemptive. The language was so sterile, so detached from the reality that I couldn't even make a damn cup of coffee. Water access will be available for all residents from a central spigot located in the community park during 2 designated 1-hour periods, from 7:00 a.m. to 8:00 a.m. and from 6:00 p.m. to 7:00 p.m. We trust this will provide ample opportunity for all to collect water for essential daily needs. We thank you for your cooperation in this vital community effort. I looked at the clock. 8:25 a.m. Of course. But it was the final line, the little postscript of poison, that truly sent me over the edge. P.S. This measure is also intended to encourage residents to reconsider non-essential high water usage activities, such as oversized vegetable gardens and excessive lawn watering, which have put an undue strain on our system. My eyes shot to the window, to the corner of my backyard. There it was, my pride and joy, my sanctuary, a small but defiantly vibrant vegetable garden. Raised beds I'd built myself, filled with heirloom tomatoes just beginning to blush, zucchini plants with leaves like elephant ears, and a row of jalapenos that promised a summer of spicy, tear-inducing joy. It was my one splash of chaotic, delicious color in this vast, beige sea of suburban conformity. My one true act of rebellion. Then, my gaze drifted across the street to Brenda's house. Brenda, the HOA president, the beige dictator herself. Her lawn was a chemically enhanced, unnaturally green carpet that probably required more water than a small African nation. And surrounding her porch, like a Praetorian guard of floral arrogance, were her prize-winning, water-guzzling rose bushes. Dozens of them, each one a perfect, smug bloom of hypocrisy. The simmering resentment I'd been nursing for months over a citation for my unapproved garden gnome, his name is Bartholomew and he is a patriot. A warning about my trash cans being visible from the street for an unauthorized 17 minutes, and a formal complaint about the excessively cheerful color of my front door finally boiled over. It wasn't just frustration anymore. It was a full-blown, righteous fury. It was a call to arms. A slow, mischievous grin spread across my face. It felt alien and wonderful. "Oh, Brenda," I whispered to my useless faucet. "You've just made a very, very powerful enemy. You want to play games with water? Fine, let's play." My fingers flew across the keyboard, a blur of indignant purpose. I ignored the Synergetic Solutions logo and opened a new browser tab. The search bar pulsed, waiting for my command. Buy large water storage. The results flooded the screen. 50-gallon rain barrels. 100-gallon tanks. Quaint, sensible solutions for normal people. But I wasn't feeling normal. I was feeling biblical. I was feeling like a man who had been pushed too far and was ready to push back with disproportionate force. I scrolled down, past the practical, and into the realm of the gloriously absurd. And then I saw it. It was black. It was massive. It was described as a military-grade, high-capacity, pillow-style water bladder. The picture showed it sitting in a dusty field, looking less like a backyard accessory and more like something you'd use to refuel a battleship. The capacity was listed in the headline, a number so ludicrous, so completely unhinged for a suburban backyard, that I laughed out loud. 10. 0 gallons. It was overkill. It was insane. It was a logistical nightmare. It was perfect. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat of joyous rebellion. I saw it all in a flash. The delivery truck, the confusion on my neighbors' faces, the impotent rage on Brenda's. It was a vision of pure, unadulterated, hydrated spite. I clicked the Add to Cart button. On the next page, a little checkbox gleamed like a holy grail. Expedited same-day delivery. It cost extra. I didn't care. I would have paid them in non-vital organs. With a final, triumphant click on the Confirm Purchase button, the deed was done. My declaration of war had been sent. I leaned back in my chair, the silence of the house no longer feeling oppressive. It felt like the calm before the storm. My storm. And it was going to be a very, very wet one. The confirmation email arrived with a satisfying ding. My 10 0-gallon bundle of joy was officially on its way. The estimated delivery window was between 1:00 p.m. and 3:00 p.m. A delicious, giddy anxiety began to bubble in my stomach. I was a giddy, anxious idiot with a 10,000-gallon problem heading his way. I had no concrete plan beyond get big water thing, fill big water thing, achieve victory. It was a work in progress. My phone buzzed, displaying an unknown number from a rural area code. I answered, expecting a robotic voice wanting to talk about my car's extended warranty. Instead, a gravelly, deeply skeptical human voice crackled through the speaker. "This is Jedediah from Prepper's Paradise Provisions. Am I speaking to a Mr. Leo Maxwell?" "You are," I said, trying to sound like a perfectly normal person who routinely buys military surplus water containers. "Well, Mr. Maxwell," Jedediah drawled, the sound of crickets and suspicion in his voice. "I'm looking at an order here that just came through. An order for one 10,000-gallon water bladder, for same-day delivery, to Harmony Creek Estates." He paused, letting the absurdity of the sentence hang in the air. "Son, you preparing for the apocalypse, or are you just really, really thirsty?" "Let's just say I'm dealing with a localized drought," I replied, pacing my office. "A drought of common sense, and I feel a civic duty to hydrate the situation. Urgently." There was a long pause on the other end, followed by a dry, wheezing chuckle. Heard that? Lord knows there's a drought of common sense going around. Well, long as your money's green, it ain't my business what you do with it. The truck's already getting loaded. Fantastic. I appreciate the prompt service. Just a word of advice, son, Jedediah added, his voice lowering conspiratorially. These things ain't exactly subtle. They're built to last, not to look pretty. You drop this thing in a manicured suburban neighborhood, people are gonna ask questions. You ain't planning on starting your own sovereign nation in that backyard, are ya? The thought has crossed my mind, I admitted. But for now, let's just call it a large-scale hydro-political statement. Whatever floats your boat, or bladder, I suppose. It's on its way. Good luck, kid. Sounds like you're gonna need it. He hung up, leaving me with a renewed sense of purpose and the dawning realization that I now had to figure out how to fill this behemoth. Owning the bladder was the statement, filling it was the exclamation point. My fingers went back to the keyboard. Bulk water delivery service near me. The first company I called was a pool filling service. The operator sounded bored until I got to the key detail. Hi, I'm looking to schedule a water delivery today, I began, adopting my most business-like tone. All right, is this for a top-off or a full pool fill? She asked, the sound of her typing clicking in the background. It's a full fill, for a large container. Okay, do you know the capacity? How many gallons are we talking? 10,000, I said, as casually as if I were ordering a pizza. The typing stopped. The silence that followed was profound. I could hear her breathe. I think I heard a bird chirp outside her window. Sir? She finally said, her voice now laced with the cautious tone one uses on a potential lunatic. Did you say 10,000 gallons? That's the one. 10,000. 1,000,000. Sir, are you filling an Olympic-sized swimming pool? Something like that, I said, thinking of Jedediah's advice. A very flexible swimming pool. It's a new design. Very eco-friendly. Right, she said, drawing the word out. Okay. We can have a tanker out there this afternoon? Sometime after 3? Our driver's name is Maria. She sounded like she was already writing up an incident report. I booked it. The timing was perfect. The bladder would arrive, I'd wrestle it into position, and then the tanker would show up just in time for Brenda's afternoon patrol, the daily ritual where she walked the neighborhood with her clipboard and eagle eyes, searching for violations. The stage was being set for a glorious matinee of malicious compliance. I spent the next couple of hours in a frenzy of preparation. I cleared a massive space in my backyard, right along the fence line I shared with an empty lot, ensuring maximum visibility from the street. I measured, I paced, I drank the last of my bottled water. I felt like a general planning a battlefield maneuver. My troops were a giant rubber bag and 0 gallons of H2O. My enemy was a middle-aged woman with a visor and an unquenchable thirst for control. It was the most alive I'd felt in years. At 1:45 p.m., a colossal flatbed truck rumbled down my quiet cookie-cutter street, groaning under the weight of my rebellion. It navigated the gentle curve of Harmony Creek Drive with the subtlety of a rhino in a ballet class. Curtains twitched in windows up and down the block. I saw Gary press his face against his living room window, his eyes wide. The truck hissed to a stop in front of my house, its air brakes sounding like a dragon's sigh. The driver, a kid no older than 25 with a scruffy beard and a faded band t-shirt, hopped down from the cab. He chewed on a toothpick, looking from the shipping order in his hand to my completely average suburban house, then back to the order. Leo Maxwell? He asked, an amused smirk already playing on his lips. The one and only, I said, walking down the driveway to meet him. You ordered the big one. He gestured with his thumb back at the folded, strapped-down mass on the flatbed. It looked like a deflated slice of the night sky. Dude, what is this thing? Seriously. It looks like you skinned a whale. It's my emotional support water bladder, I said with a straight face. I have a condition. Don't judge. He let out a bark of laughter. No judgment here, man. You paid for it. I just drop it. Where do you want your whale skin? Backyard, I said, pointing. And I'm going to need a hand. What followed was 20 minutes of the most absurd physical labor of my life. The bladder, even folded, was unbelievably heavy and awkward. It was a two-man job that really required 4 men and a forklift. We grunted, we swore, we sweated, We maneuvered it through the side gate like we were trying to shove a hippo through a cat flap. Finally, with one last coordinated heave, we unfurled it in the designated spot. It lay on my lawn, a vast, black, rubbery canvas of potential chaos, smelling faintly of industry and freedom. "All right, man," the driver said, wiping his brow on his sleeve. "She's all yours. Try not to drown the neighborhood." He gave me a fist bump, got back in his truck, and rumbled away, leaving me alone with my magnificent beast. I hadn't been alone for more than 30 seconds when a familiar, balding head popped up over the fence. It was Gary. "Leo, my boy," he shouted, his voice trembling with awe. "What in the Sam Hill is that thing? It's bigger than my car." "That, Gary," I said, patting the bladder affectionately, "is Plan B. HOA shuts off the water. I become the water." Gary's eyes went from the bladder to me and back again. A slow grin spread across his face, the first genuine, non-bewildered expression I'd seen on him in months. "You're a madman, Leo. A beautiful, crazy madman. Just a man fighting for his tomatoes, Gary. A man fighting for his tomatoes." Right on schedule, at 3:15 p.m., an even larger truck appeared. The water tanker? It was a gleaming silver cylinder of hope, and driving it was a no-nonsense woman with her hair in a tight bun and a look on her face that said she'd seen it all. This was Maria. She hopped out, took one look at the enormous hose she'd have to run, then at the bladder, and then at me. "All right," she said, her voice surprisingly cheerful. "Where's this flexible swimming pool of yours? I've filled up some weird things in my day hot tubs shaped like guitars, a baptismal font for a megachurch, a dunk tank for a CEO's morale event, but this is a new one. Glad I could contribute to your list of accomplishments." I grinned. "Let's fill her up." The process was hypnotic. Maria expertly unfurled the thick blue hose, connected it to the bladder's intake valve, and with a roar of the tanker's pump, the water began to flow. The bladder stirred. At first, it just trembled, the wrinkles in its skin slowly smoothing out. Then, it began to swell. It was like watching a black hole inflate in reverse. It rose slowly, inexorably, from a flat sheet of rubber into a low, wobbly hill, and then into a genuine, monstrous, glistening black blob. The sight was magnetic. Mrs. Henderson from 2 doors down paused her power walk, her jaw slack. The teenage kids across the street, who were usually glued to their phones, were now standing on their lawn, pointing. My backyard was no longer a private space. It was a public spectacle, the site of the strangest art installation Harmony Creek had ever seen. The neighborhood text chain I could only imagine was melting down. And then, I saw her. Like a predator drawn to a disturbance in the force, Brenda came marching down the street. Her signature white visor was pulled low, casting her face in a severe shadow. She clutched her clipboard to her chest like a holy shield. She saw the tanker truck first, its silver bulk an affront to her beige sensibilities. She saw the thick blue hose snaking its way across my lawn. And then, her eyes followed the hose, and she saw it. She saw the bladder. Her stride faltered. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her face, already pinched with disapproval, went through a spectacular color palette, from pale white to blotchy red to a deep, alarming shade of fuchsia. She looked at the swelling, wobbling behemoth in my yard, and in that moment, I knew I had already won the first battle. She regained her composure with a visible effort, her lips thinning into a razor-sharp line. She double-timed it, her sensible walking shoes slapping against the pavement with righteous fury. The confrontation was at hand. I leaned against my fence, crossed my arms, and put on my most welcoming, innocent smile. The show was about to begin. "Leo!" Her voice was a shriek that could curdle milk from 50 paces. "What is the meaning of this?" I adopted a look of pleasant surprise, as if I hadn't been waiting for this exact moment with the giddy anticipation of a kid on Christmas morning. "Brenda! So good to see you. Just doing a little landscaping hydration? You know how it is." She marched right up to my fence, her knuckles white where she gripped the top rail. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the bladder, which had now swelled to the size of a small car and was still growing. It wobbled gently, the water inside sloshing with a deep, satisfying gurgle. It looked alive. "You are in direct violation of," she sputtered, gesturing wildly at the spectacle. She flipped through the papers on her clipboard, her fury making her clumsy. Of several ordinances, I'm sure of it. Am I? I leaned forward conspiratorially. Brenda, my love, I spent the entire morning reading our beloved covenants, conditions, and restrictions. It was a riveting read, by the way. Better than most thrillers. And I couldn't find a single word in there about the maximum allowable size for a large-capacity, non-permanent personal water containment unit. I winked. You might want to add that in the next revision. Her eyes narrowed to slits. This is an outrage. It's an eyesore. It is a gross and deliberate flaunting of the community conservation efforts. You're hoarding water while the rest of us are making sacrifices. Hoarding? I placed a hand over my heart, feigning injury. Brenda, I'm not hoarding anything. Hoarding implies taking from a shared, limited resource. You made sure of that when you shut off the wells. No, this, I gestured grandly to the tanker truck, is purchased water. I bought it. With my own money. From a licensed and bonded water distribution professional. I nodded towards Maria, who gave us a quick professional wave before turning back to her gauges. This is my water, my private property. And my tomatoes, I assure you, are very, very thirsty. The logic of it seemed to short-circuit her brain. She was so used to wielding the HOA bylaws as a weapon that the idea of someone operating completely outside of them was incomprehensible. But it's huge, she finally managed, her voice cracking. That it is, I agreed cheerfully. Almost as huge as the hypocrisy of shutting off the entire neighborhood's water while your prize-winning roses continue to get their daily spa treatment. That hit a nerve. A deep, crimson blush crept up her neck. Just then, the pump on Maria's truck wound down with a final, definitive whir. The bladder was full. It sat there in my yard, a silent, shimmering black mountain of defiance. It loomed over the HOA-approved fence, its sheer, wobbly mass a testament to my glorious, spite-fueled insanity. It was magnificent. Maria disconnected the hose with a practiced twist, coiled it up, and gave me a crisp salute. 10,000 gallons on the dot. Pleasure doing business with you. She tipped her hat towards the sputtering Brenda, climbed back into her cab, and with a friendly toot of the horn, the silver tanker rumbled away. The sudden quiet was deafening. It was just me, a furious HOA president, and 0 pounds of water. Brenda was speechless. Utterly, completely, blessedly speechless. Her mouth worked, but the only sound that came out was a faint, sputtering gasp. She looked from the bladder to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and grudging disbelief. She had met an immovable object, and it was a giant bag of water. Seizing the moment, I turned to the small crowd of neighbors that had gathered at a safe distance, drawn by the commotion. Gary was there, beaming like a proud father. The teenage kids were there, filming on their phones. Mrs. Henderson was there, her power walk forgotten. Good afternoon, fellow residents of Harmony Creek, I called out, my voice booming with newfound confidence. Just wanted to let you all know that the Maxwell Family Water Co-op is officially open for business. Anyone's petunias looking a little sad? Geraniums looking gloomy? I'm thinking of starting a little Freedom Water program. Much better rates than the HOA, I assure you. No paperwork, no surprise shutoffs. Just good, clean, privately owned water for all your non-essential gardening needs. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. Gary let out a loud huzzah, which he immediately tried to stifle with a cough. Brenda finally found her voice. This isn't over, Leo, she seethed, her voice a low, venomous hiss. She pointed a trembling finger at me. This is not over. She spun on her heel and marched back to her beige fortress, her back ramrod straight, radiating pure, concentrated fury. I watched her go, a triumphant smile plastered across my face. I had poked the bear. I had flooded the bear's metaphorical rose bushes with my metaphorical water. Now, it was time to flood her literal ones. The sun was beginning to dip below the identical rooflines of Harmony Creek Estates, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Brenda would have probably cited as unapproved atmospheric colors. I sat in a lawn chair, a cold beer in hand, simply admiring my creation. It didn't make a sound, but it had a presence, a weighty, powerful presence. It's beautiful, I said to Bartholomew the gnome, whom I'd placed in a position of honor beside the bladder. In a Moby Dick's angrier, more stationary cousin kind of way, I've created a monster. A glorious, water-filled monster. Bartholomew, with his cheerful, painted-on smile, seemed to agree. The time for admiration was over. The time for action was now. My plan, conceived in a fit of spite, now needed to be executed with the precision of a suburban ninja. I had purchased a high-powered submersible pump online. It had arrived via drone delivery an hour ago, another modern miracle of impulsive vengeance, and 100 feet of heavy-duty garden hose. With the stealth of a cat burglar, I dropped the pump into the bladder's main valve. It sank into the cool, dark depths with a satisfying gloop. I connected the hose, ran the power cord to my outdoor outlet, and took a deep breath. My target was clear. Brenda's rose bushes. Those smug, thorny symbols of her tyranny, they sat directly across the street, a perfect, vibrant testament to her double standards. They needed to be taught a lesson. A very moist lesson. I waited until the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns. The neighborhood had settled into its evening rhythm. The show was about to begin, and the audience didn't even know they had tickets. Dragging the hose, which was surprisingly heavy, I crept to the very edge of my property line, crouching behind a well-manicured and HOA-approved hedge. I felt ridiculous. I felt powerful. I felt like a god of petty irrigation. I took aim, holding the nozzle like a firefighter about to battle a blaze. My thumb hovered over the switch on the pump's remote control. I could see the light on in Brenda's living room. I imagined her in there, sipping chamomile tea, plotting my demise. "This one's for the tomatoes, Brenda," I whispered. I pressed the button. The pump whirred to life, and a split second later, the hose stiffened in my hands as 0 gallons of righteous fury surged through it. A torrent of water, a thick, powerful column of liquid rebellion, erupted from the nozzle. It wasn't a sprinkle. It wasn't a shower. It was a focused, high-pressure deluge. I directed the beautiful, perfect arc of water high into the evening air. It soared over the street, a shimmering, moonlit parabola of payback, and descended directly, squarely, and biblically upon Brenda's prize-winning rose bushes. The sound was glorious. A torrential whoosh followed by the heavy drumming of water on leaves, petals, and mulch. I wasn't just watering them. I was power-washing their arrogance away. I was baptizing them in the Church of Leo. From inside Brenda's house, I heard a confused shout. A light flicked on in an upstairs window. And then came the scream. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated, apoplectic rage. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world of order and control being washed away in a tidal wave of my personal, privately owned water. I let the flood continue for a solid 30 seconds before switching off the pump. The sudden silence was punctuated by the sound of dripping water and what sounded suspiciously like Brenda hyperventilating. I reeled in my hose with the quiet satisfaction of a job well done and retreated to the shadows of my backyard, my heart pounding a triumphant rhythm against my ribs. I settled back into my lawn chair, cracked open another beer, and toasted the glistening, wobbly silhouette of my 0-gallon accomplice. The bear had been poked, and now the bear was very, very angry. I couldn't wait to see what she did next. The flashing blue and red lights arrived with surprising speed, painting my beige vinyl siding in festive, strobing colors. It was just after 9 p.m. I had been expecting a strongly worded email, perhaps a notice of violation shoved in my mailbox. I had not been expecting a visit from Harmony Creek's finest. But there they were, 2 police cruisers parked at the curb, their presence a beacon of drama in the quiet suburban night. I opened my front door before they had a chance to knock. Standing on my porch were 2 officers. The first was a man in his 50s, with a thick mustache and the weary, 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen every possible flavor of human stupidity. His name tag read Miller. His partner was young, bright-eyed, and looked like he'd just walked off the set of a recruitment video. His tag read Davis. And behind them, practically vibrating with vindicated fury, was Brenda. Her hair was damp, and there was a leaf stuck to her cheek. It was a good look for her. "Evening, officers," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Beautiful night for a light show. Is there a problem?" Officer Miller sighed, a deep, profound sound that seemed to carry the weight of every ridiculous domestic dispute he'd ever been called to. "Sir, my name is Officer Miller. This is Officer Davis. We've received a complaint." He paused, glancing at his notepad as if he couldn't quite believe the words written on it. "From your neighbor. About excessive watering?" I feigned a look of deep concern. Excessive watering? Goodness, no. In fact, I was just providing my neighbor with some much-needed hydration for her prize-winning flowers. In this heat, you can't be too careful. Community spirit and all that. He flooded them, Brenda shrieked, pointing a wet, trembling finger at me. It was a deluge, a targeted attack. He's trying to intimidate me. And look! She gestured wildly towards my backyard, which was now faintly illuminated by the police lights. Look at that thing! It's a public nuisance, a menace! Officer Davis, the rookie, craned his neck to get a better view. His professional demeanor cracked, his eyes widening in sheer disbelief. Whoa, he breathed, a note of genuine awe in his voice. That's a big water thingy. I couldn't help but smile. It's a military-grade, high-capacity, non-permanent water containment unit, officer, but big water thingy works too. Officer Miller shot his partner a look, then turned his tired gaze back to Brenda. Ma'am, he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Is there a specific city ordinance against owning a water thingy? There should be, Brenda insisted, stamping her foot. It's a safety hazard. It's an eyesore. What if it bursts? We'll all be washed away. It's military grade, Brenda, I interjected helpfully. It's been engineered to withstand shrapnel. I think it can handle the existential threat of your disapproving glare. It's more likely to survive a zombie apocalypse than your begonias are to survive your questionable gardening skills. Officer Miller pinched the bridge of his nose. I could practically feel his will to live seeping away. He was a man trapped in the crossfire of the stupidest suburban Cold War in history. Sir, he said to me, his voice pleading for reason. While I personally admire your proactive approach to horticulture, maybe you could tone it down a bit? The fire hose routine is probably not helping to de-escalate the situation. Officer, I am but a humble man trying to grow a few tomatoes in a world gone mad, I said, placing a hand on my heart. My legally purchased water was applied to my neighbor's property in a gesture of goodwill. Is generosity now a crime in Harmony Creek? He's mocking me, Brenda screeched. Ma'am, Miller said, turning back to her, his patience worn down to a single frayed thread. As far as I can tell, he hasn't broken any actual laws. He's not trespassing. The water bladder, as absurd as it is, doesn't appear to violate any city code. This is an HOA matter. A deeply, deeply strange HOA matter. I suggest you take this up at your next meeting. He gave me one last look, a flicker of something that might have been amusement in his tired eyes. Have a good night, sir. Try to water responsibly. The two officers turned and walked back to their cruisers. Officer Davis still shaking his head and occasionally glancing back at my yard with a look of wonder. I heard him mutter 10,000 gallons to Miller, who just sighed again. They got in their cars and drove away, taking their flashing lights with them and plunging the street back into a tense, suburban darkness. Brenda was left standing on the sidewalk, alone and sputtering, her chosen weapons of authority having proven useless. I gave her a cheerful little wave and a winning smile. Sleep tight, Brenda. Don't let the bedbugs bite, or get washed away in a sudden mysterious flood. She shot me a look of pure venom and stormed back to her house, slamming her front door with a force that rattled her own windows. Round 2 went to me. And as I closed my own door, I knew the war was just getting started. The police couldn't stop me. The bylaws couldn't stop me. My next challenge would be the court of public opinion. The next morning, Harmony Creek was a neighborhood divided. The story of the Great Deluge, as it was already being called in the neighborhood text chain, which I'd been secretly added to by a sympathetic teenager, had spread like wildfire. You could feel the new political lines being drawn across the immaculate lawns. You were either Team Leo or Team Brenda. There was no in-between. My first recruit, without even trying, was Gary. He appeared at my door around 9 a.m., holding a plate of slightly burnt but clearly well-intentioned chocolate chip cookies. A tribute, he said, handing me the plate with a solemnity usually reserved for diplomatic exchanges. For the general, I saw the whole thing last night. The lights, the police, Brenda's face. It was the most exciting thing to happen on this street since a squirrel got into the transformer. He leaned in closer. My petunias are looking a bit thirsty, by the way. Just saying. Gary, I said, taking a cookie. Welcome to the resistance. Water for you and your petunias is on the house. He beamed. Huzzah! Support came from other, unexpected corners. A young couple with a toddler, the Millers, cornered me while I was getting my mail. "We just wanted to thank you," the husband said in a low voice. "Brenda sent us a violation notice last month because our kid's little Tykes car was an unapproved vehicle parked on a lawn surface." "You're a hero, man." The local teenagers, who I previously thought were capable only of communicating in grunts and TikTok dances, now looked at me with a newfound respect. As I was checking the perimeter of the Bladder, two of them, the same ones who had been filming the night before, approached me. "Dude," the one with green hair said, "that was epic. Seriously, if you need anyone to guard the Bladder or anything, let us know. We got your back." "I'll keep that in mind," I said, trying not to laugh. The Bladder guard, I like it. But for every new ally, there was a hostile glare from across a lawn. Team Brenda was composed of the other two HOA board members, a humorless man named Stan, who ironed his blue jeans, and a woman named Carol, who seemed to communicate exclusively through disapproving sigh sand, a handful of residents who valued absolute conformity above all else. They drive past my house extra slowly, their faces masks of silent judgment. Brenda, realizing she couldn't win through official channels, escalated to a campaign of petty harassment. My mailbox was suddenly flooded with violation notices. My grass, which I had mowed 2 days prior, was cited for being a quarter-inch over the maximum allowable height. My welcome mat, which had been there for a year, was now deemed to be of an unapproved and excessively whimsical design. Another notice appeared citing olfactory disturbance, which I could only assume was the faint smell of rubber from the Bladder. I, in turn, embraced my new role as a suburban agent of chaos. I launched the Garden Gnome Liberation Front. Under the cover of darkness, I began placing Bartholomew's gnome brethren, which I'd ordered in bulk, in strategic locations around the neighborhood, peeking out from behind Stan's perfectly sculpted hedges, fishing in Carol's birdbath, sunbathing on the lawn of the community clubhouse. I also created a large hand-painted sign on a piece of plywood and staked it in my front yard. In big, cheerful, and possibly excessively whimsical letters, it read, "Honk if you love freedom and tomatoes." The response was immediate and glorious. Every passing car from a disaffected resident, every Amazon delivery truck, every teenager on a joyride let out a friendly toot. Our street, once a bastion of oppressive silence, now echoed with the sweet sound of vehicular dissent. Brenda, however, was about to play her trump card. One afternoon, I was admiring a particularly robust honk from the UPS driver when a large work truck belonging to Vince's Concrete Paving pulled up. A team of burly, sun-weathered men hopped out and began unloading traffic cones and jackhammers. They started setting up right in front of my driveway. Their leader, a man with a thick neck and a mustache that would have made Officer Miller jealous, strode over to me. This, I presumed, was Vince. "You Leo?" he grunted. "I am," I said, eyeing the jackhammer with suspicion. "We got a work order," he said, showing me a clipboard that looked far more intimidating than Brenda's. "Emergency sidewalk and curb repair. Right here." He pointed directly at the entrance to my driveway. "An emergency?" I looked at the pristine, uncracked sidewalk. "This sidewalk looks more stable than my 401 ek. This emergency wouldn't happen to have been reported by a woman with a white visor and a burning hatred for joy, would it?" Vince shrugged, a gesture that conveyed both an apology and a complete lack of personal investment. "Hey man, I don't ask questions. The lady in the visor paid in full, in cash, up front, with a hazard bonus for expedited service. So we're here till the job's done." He was effectively, legally blocking me in. It was a stroke of evil genius. I had to admit, I was almost impressed. "I see," I said, a new plan already forming in my head. I gestured toward the blazing sun. "Well, it's a hot day to be breaking up perfectly good concrete for no reason. I bet you and your crew get pretty thirsty." Vince's eyes narrowed. "What's it to you?" I smiled my most charming conspiratorial smile. "How about I make you and your crew a counteroffer? A little hydration donation? I happen to have a fairly substantial source of cool, refreshing water right here in my backyard. Think of it as a working in the hot sun for a crazy HOA lady bonus." Vince looked from me to his sweaty crew, then in the direction of my backyard where the top of the giant black Bladder was visible over the fence. A slow, understanding grin spread across his face. "You drive a hard bargain," he said, extending a calloused hand. "I think we can work something out. The boys and I are feeling mighty parched." The siege of my driveway had just turned into a pool party. Brenda's plan was about to backfire, gloriously. The emergency sidewalk repair turned into the most leisurely construction project in human history. Vince and his crew were masters of the slow-motion jackhammer. They treated concrete demolition like it was a delicate art form, to be savored, not rushed. And they were, as Vince had predicted, mighty parched. My backyard became their unofficial break room. I ran a hose from the bladder to a cooler I'd filled with ice, creating a makeshift, high-volume water dispenser. They'd come back, fill up their jugs and hard hats, and lounge in my lawn chairs, singing the praises of the magic water bag. "You know," Vince said to me on day 2, as he relaxed in my best patio chair, "the lady in the visor called this morning, asked for a progress report. I told her we ran into some unexpectedly stubborn aggregate. She didn't sound happy." He took a long drink of water and winked. "Told her it might take a few more days than we thought. Gotta be thorough, you know?" I had effectively bought the loyalty of Brenda's own mercenaries with nothing but cold water and basic human decency. They became my eyes and ears. They told me when Brenda was doing her surveillance drives and would suddenly burst into a flurry of loud, performative work whenever she was watching. My driveway remained completely blocked, but I didn't care. I worked from home. My car could stay in the garage. This was a war of attrition, and my enemy was paying my allies' salaries. It was beautiful. The climax was inevitable. After 4 days of honking cars, liberated gnomes, and a stalled construction project fueled by my rebellion bladder, Brenda finally snapped. An email, dripping with impotent fury, was sent to the entire neighborhood. Subject: Mandatory Emergency HOA Meeting. Addressing the ongoing community standards crisis. The meeting was to be held that evening at the community clubhouse. The crisis, of course, was me. The clubhouse, a sterile, beige room that usually hosted potlucks and uninspired yoga classes, was packed. The air crackled with tension. It was like the OK Corral, but with more dockers and sensible footwear. Team Leo, composed of Gary, the Miller family, the Bladder Guard teenagers, Vince's entire concrete crew, who had shown up in a show of solidarity, and a surprising number of other fed-up residents took up the entire left side of the room. We were a motley, cheerful crew. Team Brenda Stan, Carol, and a handful of stern-faced traditionalists were clustered on the right, looking grim. Brenda stood at the podium, her face a mask of cold fury. She tapped the microphone, a high-pitched squeal echoing through the room. "This emergency meeting has been called," she began, her voice tight, "to address a series of gross violations that threaten the very fabric of our community. A campaign of escalating anarchy, initiated and perpetuated by one individual, Mr. Leo Maxwell." All eyes turned to me. I gave a little wave. What followed was a PowerPoint presentation of my crimes. Brenda clicked through the slides with a vengeance. There was a blurry, zoomed-in photo of the bladder, labeled "The Nuisance." There was a picture of Bartholomew, the gnome, labeled "Unapproved Statuary." There was a photo of her waterlogged rose bushes, the leaves drooping sadly, under the title "Vandalism." The final slide was just a picture of my face, which she'd clearly taken from my LinkedIn profile, with the words "The Anarchist" written underneath in a dramatic, blood-red font. "This man has mocked our bylaws," she declared, her voice rising. "He has harassed law-abiding residents. He has created an eyesore and a safety hazard. He has hoarded water during a conservation period. He has turned our peaceful neighborhood into a circus." She looked around the room, expecting thunderous applause. Instead, she got a few polite claps from Stan and Carol, and a lot of uncomfortable silence. When she was finished, she said, "The board proposes an immediate and substantial fine against Mr. Maxwell, as well as a formal demand for the immediate removal of the bladder. All in favor?" Stan and Carol's hands shot up. A few others hesitantly followed. Before Brenda could declare it a victory, I stood up. "I believe I have a right to respond to these allegations," I said, walking toward the front of the room. Brenda glared at me. "Fine. But make it quick." I didn't have a PowerPoint. I didn't have a clipboard. I walked up to the podium, reached into my jacket pocket, and pulled out a single, perfect, brilliantly red tomato from my garden. I placed it gently on the podium. Brenda has told you I'm a monster, I began, my voice calm and clear. She's told you I'm a menace, a water hoarder, an anarchist. I looked around the room, making eye contact with my neighbors. But what am I really guilty of? Growing this. I held up the tomato for everyone to see. I'm guilty of wanting to grow my own food, of wanting a little bit of color in a world of beige. I'm guilty of believing that a community shouldn't be run like a petty dictatorship. I turned my gaze to Brenda. Brenda shut off our water, not because of a shortage, not because of a real emergency. She shut off our water because she doesn't like my tomatoes. She used the bylaws as a weapon to punish someone for not conforming to her exact standards. She shut off your water, too. She decided that her roses were more important than Gary's petunias. More important than the Miller family's little patch of grass for their daughter to play on. More important than your right to simply turn on your tap and make a cup of coffee in the morning. A murmur went through the crowd. People were looking at each other, nodding. The Bladder, I continued, gesturing vaguely in the direction of my house, is ridiculous. I know that. It's a giant, absurd, 10,000-gallon symbol of how fed up I was. But the question tonight isn't about my bladder, it's about Brenda's leadership. Are you going to let one person's petty power trip dictate how you live your lives? Are you going to be fined for the color of your welcome mat and lectured about your kids' toys? Or are you going to be a community of neighbors who can, just live? I let the question hang in the air. The silence was thick. Then, a voice from the crowd shouted, "He's right!" It was Gary, standing on his chair, his face flushed with excitement. "I miss my petunias, and Leo's been giving me water for them all week. He's a good neighbor." Then one of the Bladder Guard kids yelled, "Yeah! Down with the beige dictator!" Suddenly, Vince the contractor stood up, his arms crossed over his massive chest. "And I'll tell you another thing," he boomed, his voice filling the room. "She hired us for a bogus job just to harass the guy. That ain't right." The room erupted. It wasn't a debate anymore. It was a revolution. People were on their feet, all talking at once. Through the din, Mrs. Henderson, the power walker, stood on a chair and yelled, "I move for a vote of no confidence in Brenda as HOA president." The chaos coalesced into a single roar of approval. Brenda stood at the podium, her face ashen. She was watching her meticulously controlled world crumble around her. The vote was a formality. It was a landslide, a show of hands, and it was over. Brenda was voted out. Her reign of terror had ended not with a bang, but with a tomato and a giant bag of water. The room exploded in cheers and applause. I saw Stan and Carol trying to discreetly sneak out the back door. Brenda, stunned and defeated, stumbled away from the podium. She gave me one last, withering look of pure hatred, and then stormed out of the clubhouse. In the celebratory chaos that followed, Gary, beaming, clapped me on the back. "Well done, Mr. President!" "Don't even joke about that," I said, laughing. But then, Mrs. Henderson, now the de facto master of ceremonies, got everyone's attention. "We need an interim president until we can hold a proper election," she announced. "Someone to get things back on track. I nominate Leo." The crowd roared its agreement. "Leo! Leo! Leo!" I held up my hands, trying to wave them off. "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Are you people insane?" I shouted over the noise. "I'm the guy who bought a 10 zero-gallon water bladder out of spite. I am not president material. My entire platform is based on garden gnomes and tactical hydration." Gary leaned in, his eyes twinkling. "That's exactly why you're perfect for the job." I looked out at the sea of expectant faces. Vince gave me a thumbs up. The teenagers chanted my name. I was trapped, defeated by my own victory. With a deep sigh of resignation that quickly turned into a grin, I stepped back up to the podium and picked up my tomato. "All right," I said into the microphone, the room falling silent. "My first act as your new, deeply unqualified, and possibly temporary president. The community wells are turned back on. Effective immediately." A massive cheer went up. "Second," I continued, holding up a hand for quiet. "All pending violations for grass height, welcome mat color, and cheerful gnome placement are hereby null and void." Another, even louder cheer. "And third," I said, a mischievous glint in my eye. "Effective next week. Garden Gnome Mondays are now mandatory." The room erupted in laughter and applause. I had won. The rebellion was over. And somehow, I'd ended up in charge. This was going to be interesting. A week later, Harmony Creek Estates was a different place. The oppressive beige pall had lifted, replaced by a sense of life. The community wells were flowing freely. Gardens, once thirsty and timid, were flourishing under the newly liberated water supply. There was an air of camaraderie, of shared victory. The honking had mostly stopped, replaced by friendly waves. And in my backyard, the great black bladder still sat, a silent monument to the revolution. It was slowly, gradually, shrinking as I continued to water my garden and top off the petunias of my neighbors, a benevolent water god dispensing blessings from my vinyl-sided Olympus. Being the interim HOA president was as strange as it sounded. My first official act was to draft a one-page revision to the bylaws. It consisted of a single sentence. Rule 1. Don't be a jerk. It passed unanimously. We abolished most of the ridiculous rules, focusing instead on planning a community barbecue. Vince and his crew had finished the emergency sidewalk repair. After enjoying a few more days of hydrated R-Rand, he'd given the HOA a new management discount on the invoice. I was in the produce aisle of the local grocery store, trying to decide if I was a fancy organic kale kind of leader now, when I saw her. It was Brenda. She was inspecting an avocado with the same ferocious intensity she used to use on my lawn. She saw me at the same time I saw her. She immediately tried to become intensely interested in a display of parsnips, turning her back to me. No such luck. This was an encounter that had to happen. I pushed my cart over. "Brenda," I said, my voice gentle, "fancy meeting you here." She refused to look at me, sniffing disdainfully. "I'm just getting a few things before the movers arrive." "Moving?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Yes," she said, finally turning to face me, her eyes cold. "We're moving. To a community that appreciates order and proper rose care, a community with standards." "Well," I said, picking up an avocado and giving it a squeeze, "I wish you the best of luck with that." I paused. "Oh, and by the way, you have a little something." I pointed to my own cheek. "Right here." She instantly went rigid, her hands flying to her face, frantically wiping at an imaginary smudge of dirt. A flicker of the old, paranoid Brenda. I smiled. Some things never change. I left her there, patting her cheeks and glaring at the avocados as if they had betrayed her. Back at home, the mail had arrived. Tucked between a seed catalog and a letter from my mother was a crisp, white envelope. It was from the bulk water delivery company. My invoice had arrived. I opened it with a sense of dread. The number at the bottom was substantial. It was, without a doubt, the most I had ever paid for water in my entire life. It was a truly astronomical sum for a single, glorious act of defiance. I stood there for a long moment, the invoice in my hand, looking at the four-figure number. Then, I walked to my back window. I looked at my thriving, vibrant garden, the red of the tomatoes so bright they almost glowed. I saw Gary next door, happily watering his now perky petunias. I heard the sound of the miller's little girl laughing as she ran through a sprinkler on her lawn. And I looked at the giant, absurd, and beautiful water bladder, the hero of our story, now resting peacefully in the afternoon sun. Was it worth it? I walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up the perfect, ripe tomato I'd brought back from the HOA meeting, and took a bite. The flavor exploded in my mouth, sweet, acidic, and real. The taste of victory. Every single ridiculously expensive drop. You can't put a price on freedom. You can't put a price on the look on Brenda's face when she saw a 10-0-gallon middle finger sitting in my backyard. And you definitely can't put a price on a homegrown tomato, eaten in the warm afternoon sun of your own, liberated and finally harmonious little kingdom.